Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyson Geary, and I am the Director of Accreditation and School Improvement at NEASC. I'm here today, joined by four of my fellow directors to give you some perspectives from the field. We thought this would be an exciting opportunity for us to talk a little bit about some of the schools that we visited during this academic year, and share with you some of the exceptional practices that we feel like are going on in schools around NEASC, in public schools, independent schools, and international schools. So these are our panelists today, and I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work. We'll start with Darlene Fisher from our International Commission.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darlene Fisher, and I am an international accreditation leader for the international section of NEASC. I've been working with NEASC for about 8 years now, and very much enjoy working with all the schools I get to visit around the world. I used to be obviously in schools for around 40 years, in fact, and the last job I had was as director at Anchor Schools in Istanbul. So have experienced 20 years in international schools, all IB schools, and understand a lot about them. All of them were NEASC accredited as well, which was a bit of fun. I'm actually calling in from Melbourne, hence all of this warm gear, because it's 11 p.m. at night and it's cold because we're going in. I'm looking forward to the evening shared with you.
Thank you, Darlene, and thank you for staying up for us. All right, Carl.
Yeah, so Carl Johnson, one of the associate directors in the Commission on Public Schools. Prior to joining NEASC, I spent 20 years in public schools in Connecticut, most recently before joining NEASC as principal of Plainville High School in Plainville, Connecticut.
Great, thank you. Carrie?
Hi, I'm Carrie Wilson, and I'm an associate director for the Commission on Independent Schools. I'm based out of Vermont, and this morning, however, I'm in our Lowell office. I worked for 25 years at an independent school in Vermont, 16 of those as head of school, and I'm excited to be joining everyone today.
And Edie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edie Traina, and I'm the director of the Commission on Independent Schools. I, like Carrie, just joined NEASC this past year, and before that, I spent over 20 years working in boarding schools in New England. And like Darlene, they were all NEASC accredited schools. And most recently, I was the assistant head of school. And so I'm so happy to be here today and talk about this journey I've been on for the last 8 months.
That's wonderful. And again, I'm Alyson Geary. I'm the director for the Commission on Public Schools. I've been with NEASC for 11 years. Previous to that was a principal in Massachusetts, an assistant principal in Massachusetts, and started my career as a drama teacher in Las Vegas. So we are all really glad to be here with you. I would say that, I think we all enjoy our jobs immensely, and especially the best part is working with the schools that we get to work with around New England and around the world. And so we're excited to talk to you today a little bit about our work. So the first question I want to talk about is what makes our job unique? Why is this a unique job? We've all had lots of jobs in education, but what makes this job unique? So I would love to hear from maybe Edie first and then Carrie, since they've joined us the most recently. What has been unique about this job?
Thanks, Alyson. I would say that something that it should be unsurprising, but it ended up being a bit of a silver lining is how often I get to see learning in action and across so many different types of communities, and just how energizing it is. And as we were waiting for this call to start, we were all talking about schools we'd recently visited. And I think that organic sharing that happens at NEASC about the exciting things happening at our member schools is just one of the most amazing elements of this work for me.
Love that. Carrie?
Yeah, I would echo Edie's sentiments and really emphasize that there are times when, as a leader, you're working in your own school and your perspective is really limited to your own school. And I think one of the things that I've developed a sincere gratitude and appreciation for is the diversity within our member schools and the opportunity to spend so much quality time working with administrators, working with teacher leaders, and really seeing the incredible impact that culture has on student engagement and student learning. It's a sincere privilege.
Wonderful. Darlene, do you have a thought about that? What makes our job unique?
Oh, I think it's extraordinary because all of the schools that are doing NEASC accreditation are doing it because they want to do it, and therefore they are looking to get better. They're looking to, really take a deep dive into the learning that they're doing and explore what it is they're doing well, what it is they want to do better, and to really find examples. And as Carrie was saying, sometimes you're in a closed environment and you don't see a variety of examples. So as a visitor like we are, you come into a school and you can say, have you thought about, well, I saw one school do this, another school did some, another school did that. You could choose or make a meld of it. So it's an extraordinary honor to be working in schools, being able to provide a variety of stories as well as help them in their journeys as they wish to get better. It's wonderful.
And we were talking before the webinar about how many countries you visited this year. What did you say?
I think it's 12 so far.
12 countries so far this year that Darlene has visited. So it's pretty exciting. All right, Carl. Oh, go ahead, Darlene. Sorry.
No, I just said it's good fun.
Yeah, good fun. Lots of planes, right? Lots of plane trips. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so I was just good, building on what everyone else said, but I was going to share it's just what originally got me so interested in chairing visits for NEASC and going out on visits and going to schools. It's now the same thing I get to see on just a much broader scale of just the incredible practices and educators solving problems that, I'm always blown away when someone finds a quick, easy fix to something that, I couldn't figure out, or something that I had a hard time. And then all of a sudden I see where they've developed something or they've figured something out, and just, many times just standing in awe of the great work, that educators are doing across New England.
Yeah, I love that. I would just mention that I really enjoy chairing visiting teams and sort of meeting educators. You come together in this team environment, and after a couple of days, you feel, like you've made new friends, right? You've got this group of people that you've spent this time with, that you've had these deep conversations with, and it's always fun and interesting to meet so many different educators as I go on visiting teams and of course go to the schools as well. So that is something that I really enjoy about our work. Awesome. Well, so today we're gonna highlight some of the schools that we've seen this year, and we're gonna talk about sort of three separate strands: leadership and culture, real world learning, and learning design. And so we'll start with leadership and culture, and we're sort of framing the conversation around the question, how do you intentionally build a strong sense of culture among teachers and students at a school? And so several of our directors are going to share some examples of schools that they have seen this year where they feel that there was a strong sense of culture among teachers and students. So we're going to start with Carl.
Yeah, so the example I wanted to share when we were talking about this, I had the pleasure of visiting a school up in Poland, Maine. It's Poland Regional High School. And Poland Regional High School serves 3 communities in Maine, and a very unique structure that when I chaired the visit to the school, and got to understand this more deeply over the 2 days that we were there. So I think many schools have some type of school leadership model or some kind of school leadership structure, but what they did was very unique. They have a school leadership team that they call the Vision Keepers. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they really want to maintain the culture and the vision of the school that they set forth when it was created. So what made it exceptionally unique, and the part I'm kind of building to, is that there was 2 students on the Vision Keepers. And one of the students who was giving us the tour of the building when we started the visit, I asked him directly, kind of, we had, student representation on our Board of Education, but it was kind of just to give updates from a student perspective. And so that was my perspective of what he was saying when he said he served on this team. But then I asked him, do you actually help with decision making, and do you help with these things? And come to find out is that those 2 students meet with the leadership team plus the elected teachers who are on that Vision Keeper team. And they're there every meeting. And they are truly looking at the decisions that are being made at the school, and they're fully ingrained in that leadership model of that school. And it was just one of the most like embedded, unique perspectives I've ever seen with that. The other part that was incredibly interesting with that was they also used their advisory model to kind of build towards all this. So there's a lot of interconnected parts that they were using. They were really intentional about their advisories, much more intentional than I ever was as a principal. I did it the bad way, where you just did, A through Z and broke them up like every 25 kids. They really tried to create these dynamic groups of students working when they transitioned to high school. The last piece I'll just say quickly was that they used those advisories to also do a state of the school day, where they break up into advisories, they do team buildings, but then they actually make proposals of policies they want to see at the school, and they talk about how the school is doing, and they have these really deep conversations about that. And then they work through that during the year, and they bring that to the vision keepers. And so just this really embedded shared leadership that was incredibly unique.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Darlene, do you want to share your example?
Sure. I think the school I want to talk about as an example, we're really talking about as developing a culture where students believe they have agency and a voice and choice and a variety, and have a capacity and a potential to impact their environment around them, and not only in an academic sense, but also in a real world sense. And I first got to know the school a few years back, and the example that I learned about then was where they took grade 9 students off schedule, and they worked through their own schedule, creating time for their classes and working through their projects. What ended up happening is, and what the school has now, is day 9, where everybody has, not everybody in the whole school, but the high school, students choose their schedule for the day. Now that will include some of their mainstream classes, particularly for the senior students, but it also gives them opportunities to block out time to do specialist work, or to take up projects that they really want to get involved in. And so the school has shown that they believe students can and should have that agency. So the school is building that culture of student responsibility and engagement by giving them those opportunities and supporting and structuring and scaffolding the time as the students need it earlier on, so that the students get better and better and more able to be independent. But I think the one I saw just recently, when I was lucky to be at the WAB conference, the Western Academy of Beijing, and in Beijing, was at a conference where the students were able to share that they had actually designed a playground for themselves. This is the middle school students, and there's a link that has been shared about this in particular. And I think the beauty of this is the joy that these students have show, because they recognize that they've been heard, they've been powerful, they've been engaged in the process, they've helped plan. They didn't build it themselves, but they certainly planned and were engaged in the whole plan. And I think they were able to say how it impacted them. It wasn't just a fun thing to do that they were able to create a playground, but they recognized how it helped with their well-being. And they could say, you know what, people don't think we need a playground because we're in middle school, but coming out of class and being able to bounce on and to climb up stuff, this is just so good for us. And so seeing the school give them the space to own, the capacity of them to do and make changes within their environment, as well as to manage their academic learning on a particular day every 2 weeks. I think this is a powerful way of a school creating an agent, a culture that helps and supports students develop their own belief in themselves and their self-efficacy. Powerful example. And if you want to smile, just watch that video. It's a couple of minutes long, and the kids bouncing and playing on this stuff is fabulous.
It is really fun. I watched it, and it's like, 12, 13, 14-year-olds playing as if they're, 6, 7, and 8. And it's wonderful. And it's and it's equipment that was made for them, like for their size and their, their interest level and all of that. So yeah. So I just want to mention, we're going to put links in the chat for some of the schools that we're going to talk about today. And we're also going to send out resources after the webinar to everyone who has registered that has links to all of the schools that we're sharing and talking about today. So please don't worry that you won't get everything in the chat. We'll make sure that we send it out and or post it on the website so you can see all of those examples. The thing I think about this topic of culture and what you both talked about is this sense of student agency, right? Students being able to take part in their own learning and to pursue things that they're excited about and passionate about and really feel like they have a voice. Like in Carl's example, feeling like the kids actually had a voice at the table. This idea, I recently visited Westwood High School in Westwood, Massachusetts, and they have a J term at the end of the year where they have a full week where students can decide what they would like to focus on, and the classes end at a certain point, and then students actually get to choose a passion project that they want to do for that last week of school. And I think finding ways for students to be able to pursue what's important to them is such a big part of building that positive culture for students. I think Carl had one more example, and then if anybody else has thoughts, we can go there.
Yeah, so and I don't mean to a lot of my examples are from Maine, and I should share that even though I'm based in Connecticut, I spend a lot of time up in Maine. I've always had a love affair with Maine, so one of the great parts is I get to spend time up there and see the great work they're doing. So the other example I want to share is Brunswick High School in Brunswick, Maine. And I recently chaired the visit there as well. And I should mention both of those schools are also my schools in terms of our liaisons, so I get to work with them directly through our process. Brunswick High School, what I was blown away with, and I think it's one of those things where sometimes you need to go deeper into the work that people are doing because, like when you first hear it, you kind of fit it into the mold of what you know and what you understand, and you're not fully sometimes grasping what they're telling you. And that was my example with that one. Was when I first visited the school, they told me they had these things called PLGs, and when I first heard it, I took it as, well, that's just PLCs, professional learning communities that many schools do. And I didn't really think it was anything too unique because a lot of schools have embedded that process. When I went up and did the visit, and reading their self-reflection and getting to learn a lot more about who they were and really kind of digging into this a little bit, was learning that these PLGs, there was a lot more happening here than I had first given it credit for. And what they were doing was they had their normal leadership structure where they had departments, usually focused on the academic pieces. So you have like a history department, English department. What they did with the PLGs, though, is that they found things that were whole school issues that needed to be dealt with. And so again, I think a phenomenal model of shared leadership where they would let teachers choose every year the PLG that they wanted to serve on. And so educators would pick the PLGs. And so they had ones around climate and culture. They had ones around instructional practices. They had ones around all these different pieces. And these became, almost like mini study groups where they would dive deeply into these topics. And then they would report back to the school and they would share practices and they would share ideas with the school. And they would meet regularly in these cross-disciplinary teams. And the thing that struck me, having been a high school person my entire career, it was breaking people out of their departments. And it was getting people to have conversations, looking at the entire school instead of just, I was a history teacher. So my joke I always share is you put 10 history teachers in a room, I can tell you what we're going to talk about after 10 minutes. It's like, and it was breaking people out of that. It was getting them to have conversations about the whole school. The example that I saw when I was up there was they were, like a lot of schools, and we actually did a forum earlier this year about it, was they were talking about cell phones and what the cell phone rules should be for the school moving forward. And so they have this built-in structure to think about that and to dive deep into that. So they formed a PLG this year about cell phones. And the teachers who are on that team are doing research and they're learning about what other schools are doing and they're reading books about it and they're doing this really deep work so that they're trying to create this shared leadership where everyone is invested in what happens. And it's not just one decision, it's not just one person, it's the idea that they're all diving into these topics and really thinking deeply about them. So again, just one of those great examples I've had where, when I first heard about it, I thought it was one thing. And then as I learned more about it, learned like there was so much more going on to this program.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I love that example in terms of, how do teachers then have agency and feel like they have a voice in the school environment. I want to encourage the participants that if you have a similar practice or something that's happening in your school that you think is going really well, to feel free to add that to the chat. I think people, love to hear what lots of other schools are doing. These are just as very few of our schools that we're talking about today. So if you have something like a best practice around building culture in your school, feel free to add that to the chat. And if you do have specific questions for us or questions about the schools we're talking about, you can add that to the Q&A. All right, so why don't we transition and talk a little bit about real world learning, and Carrie and Edie are going to share some thoughts there. So the question that we wanted to explore is, how do you give students experiences beyond the walls of their school? So how are schools doing that? And Edie, I think we're going to start with an example from you.
Sure. Thanks, Alyson. So my example might seem a bit on the nose for the prompt of getting beyond the walls of school, because it's going to be about travel. But something Carl just said really got me thinking about when we take the time to dig deeper and look for the insightful connections and the planning that goes into so many of these examples, that we see really the beauty of how they can align with not only the school's mission, but I think the goals that so many of us are talking about for what we want education to be circa 2025. And so my example is from the Loomis Chaffee School, which is located in Windsor, Connecticut. It is a day and boarding high school. And they have a program that's through their Alvord Center for Global and Environmental Studies. And it's specifically an experiential travel program. And so the way that it's structured is that it's small groups. It's led by the faculty of Loomis, so not outside agents, but rather the teachers who are there every day and know these kids really well. And what they want to do is build perspective. And so what's interesting is that this idea that oftentimes in boarding schools, you do have a very global community, and the idea of going out with that diverse group of peers and experiencing a new place in the world together can be incredibly formative. And so their schedule for just this year alone, spring and summer, and this is a year-round program, which just takes a lot of effort and a lot of planning, and their director works incredibly hard. This spring and summer, they have trips planned to Morocco, Spain, Greece, Hawaii, and they're also planning a canoeing trip down the Connecticut River, which is based on a course that was offered at Wesleyan University many years ago. That is truly, you are in the canoe, you are keeping a field journal, and you are observing the river that runs by your campus. But you're seeing it both from the northern perspective and the southern perspective. They canoe right by their school. And so in doing so and in designing these programs, yes, it's about the journey and it's about going out there and exploring, but it's also about fusing together this idea of being a scholar explorer. And so each trip has an academic kind of grounding, whether that's comparative history or cultural anthropology or linguistics or ecology. And one other element of this program that I really appreciate is that they try to include as many students during their time at Loomis as possible. And so this takes an extraordinary effort by the school for accessibility, affordability, and making students and their families know this is a program for everyone. And I think that in all the materials, the fact that they want it to be inclusive is just a wonderful message for the school.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds really fun. And something that, I'm sure, And I love that connection of like, yes, we're doing this trip, but what is the learning that's going along with that, right? So it's one thing to go and sightsee, but then how do we understand the people, the culture, the history, all of those pieces? So it sounds like they're putting all of that together.
And I'll just add one thing, Alyson, to your point, the idea that students are encouraged to use their experiences on these travels as primary sources. And so you might be writing a paper for your English class, your history class, or your language class. And the idea of citing this trip as part of an academic experience is something that's central to the way of framing it as a scholarly pursuit.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Great. Carrie, do you have a experience or a school to share about?
Yes, I do. And Edie, I'm thinking about what you've just described and how students are citing this experience. And I'm just wondering which section of the APA manual that end note no, all joking aside, I think that is absolutely remarkable. And I think about the courage and the bravery. We really talk about how this is a great experience. It's exciting. But really, stepping outside of students' comfort zones, I mean, that's what learning is about, and what a great program. What I'd like to highlight Immaculate Conception Catholic Regional School, and this school is located in Cranston, Rhode Island. And I spent some time there this winter, and I was really impressed by their Pathways program. And this is something that gives students in grades 5 through 8 the opportunity to explore two very dynamic tracks, fine arts and innovative thinking. So each trimester, students choose a focus from theater to film, debate to dance, coding, just all of these really, really interesting approaches. And it brings their learning to life through these capstone presentations, which are rich with creativity, confidence, and authentic growth. And so the school uses Wednesday afternoon pathway blocks to cultivate this voice and choice and these real world skills that we've been talking about this morning. Student milestones, public presentations, they're all embedded into this learning cycle, and students are encouraged to be creative problem solvers, artists, and communicators, which I think we all agree the world needs more of. And the work connects the school's vision of the graduate in meaningful and measurable ways. This isn't a program in a box. This is a living example of what can happen when a school dares to imagine something more for its students. Mike Miele, the principal, Megan Morales, the director of the arts, they're really providing students at Immaculate Conception really incredible opportunities, and their campus demonstrates that commitment and the excitement that the students express when you have the opportunity to chat with them about this. It's palpable, and this is something that students feel incredible ownership of, and they're excited to demonstrate not just their interests, but their learning in really creative and innovative ways.
That's great. I love that. It's awesome to think about, again, and those connections to the vision of the graduate, which is something that we in the public schools have really been working hard on, in finding ways for students to showcase the things that they are really good at, and that we can all find that every kid has different strengths, and we can highlight those strengths through this idea of the vision of the graduate. So I love that. I think, Carl, I think you have another Maine example, back with Maine.
Yeah, so this one is relatively new, which it's developing, but it's one of the most exciting things I've heard about in quite a while. So Wiscasset High School in Maine, which is located in Wiscasset, Maine, what you see is they've actually been donated a schooner. So a tall ship that I believe it's a 137-foot schooner, 140-foot schooner. And what's going to be happening is that they're trying to create a program, almost like a CTE program around maritime, where students will be able to use the ship as a learning experience. I was just speaking to the principal, and they actually are offering trips this summer to students in Maine, who can live on board the ship for a week, and really, kind of dive into the maritime history of Maine. And to me, when I was talking to the principal, who's doing this, I think it was to me, it hits something really special, which is it's very connected to who they are in that town. And Wiscasset has a long history of maritime work and a long history of that being a major part of their culture. And so it's really tapping into something that is historical and very much about who they are in that community. And it was very exciting hearing about kind of how this was happening and how it was unfolding very quickly. And I think, the thing to me that I think is a great lesson is just, thinking outside the box and being open to things that at first, glance sound like something we can't do or something, scary. It's like the classic what if question. And something that got kind of presented to them, where they now have this incredible opportunity. And I firmly believe it's going to turn into something incredibly special for students in Maine, who are going to be able to use this as a resource for years to come and really, get into those pieces. The other piece that was, and I remember talking to the principal about this, was when they were having some initial meetings about this, just the number of groups and organizations that are incredibly interested in supporting this work. And you can kind of imagine for the maritime piece, there are a lot of groups in Maine, and then there's also companies and organizations that have all kind of stepped forward and want to try to help with this work because they see this as a major need to have students learning about sailing and learning about boats and ocean and all that kind of stuff. And it's just really interesting to see how this is going to develop, but just something very cool. And I think their real hope at some point is to build to the point where they're almost doing like a semester at sea type situation. And so students will live on the boat and travel on it and really learn a lot about, just that piece of industry and all that work that can be done. So
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's so interesting too. In New England, we are in large schools like Brockton High School in Massachusetts, that's 4,000 students, and then smaller schools like Wiscasset up in Maine, that's maybe 300 students. So we have these perspectives about sort of the different areas in New England and sort of the ways that, the types of things and experiences that they want for their students. So I really appreciate that. Edie, I think we're going to close this section with one more example from you.
Great, thanks, Alyson. And that idea of perspective building, I think is so important. And my example is a perspective building in a local community. And it, reminded that, oftentimes we have cities and towns where there's lots of different schools with different missions right there next to one another. But how often do the students actually get to know one another and build relationships? We're, usually just we're in our community and we're focused on the work there. And so my example is from another school in Connecticut. It's called the Taft School. It's located in Watertown, and they are a boarding and day high school. And about 10 years ago, they started a program called the Taft Global Leadership Institute. And it's a public-private partnership, and it's made possible by a grant from the E.E. Ford Foundation. And like Carl was just saying, this school community asked that what if question. They said, what if we tried to build a program where our students worked alongside students from Waterbury's public schools on service-based projects that would impact the local community? How could we make that work? And I think straight off the idea of, wow, it's a lot of logistics and kids are busy and how do we move people around and, talking about things like buses and schedules, but none of that got in the way. And 10 years going, this program just celebrated this big anniversary with a set of student presentations where the cohort of selected students who apply to be in this program talked about the projects they'd been working on for the last 18 months. And they're all about citizen-based engagement and activism. And they're working with local nonprofits. So the Connecticut Food Bank, for example, or the Connecticut Council on Aging, or the Waterbury Police Athletic League. One student from Taft and one student from a Waterbury area public school would go and they'd identify an area for organizational improvement. They would speak to all the different constituents, and then they'd put their plan in action. And so we saw everything from doing a day of care for people living in different homes for memory care around the Waterbury area, and going in and spending time with the residents. We saw programs that were about raising awareness about food instability in the greater Waterbury area. Lots of programs focused on reading literacy, and also just the idea of how you can make your community a better place to live. So something as simple as picking up the trash and creating efforts in school communities where groups of teenagers are going out and they're doing that hard work, but they're doing it with a sense of purpose. And so overall, this idea that I think the program is really visionary, and I think it's replicable at so many different schools. And I know that the Taft community is very happy to share their blueprint, because when you focus the talents and energies of these young people on their local communities, you're really creating a next generation of individuals who are going to incorporate service into their life. And that's just a really important message that this Global Leadership Institute is trying to share and share generously.
That's wonderful. It sounds like a great program.
It's a lot of work, but it comes together. And I think their willingness to share the blueprint and the model is part of that vision.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for those of you who are sharing in the chat some of your own examples. We have one from another independent public school in Maine with a partnership on education and climate activism that Rachel just shared with us. So please, everyone, feel free to post other examples or things for real world learning. That's a mouthful, saying all that together. All right, so we're going to move on to our last topic, which is learning design. So really thinking about what we're seeing in classrooms and what we're seeing in terms of how schools are designing their learning. So the question that we're framing this around is, what kinds of innovative practices are schools using to redesign their learning? And we're going to start with Darlene.
All right. I forget the name of the school and the place. It's a learning project in Ibiza. And they're using a really innovative project through AI, an organization called Volantis, which is developing a way to give regular feedback to students on their competencies. So they're moving to a structure of, there's two things that are innovative here. One is the fact that the school is really focusing on developing clarity around the competencies that they want students to develop rather than the content knowledge. And they have it divided into, excuse me while I just read this, I want to get it right. Self-management, encouraging responsibility, focus, and adaptability. They want to look at social intelligence, fostering collaboration, empathy, and leadership, and developing innovation, developing creativity, problem solving, and critical thinking. So they're using these competencies that their learning program is developed to support and develop in the students. Each of these competencies is described across a 1 to 5 scale. And then, so they're doing this, which is a key part of what a lot of schools are now talking about, in the sense that content knowledge isn't what it's all about. It's a part of knowledge and what should go on in schools, but the development of competencies that enable students to be independent and innovative and critical thinkers for the future ready, is a key element of what we're trying to do. The problem, of course, is how do you evaluate this? Well, Volantis has come up with a way of supporting the school collecting a variety of feedback. So students will get feedback through reflections, through peer input, and facilitator observations that are collated by AI and then put into the reports as often as they wish. Now, this is innovative and at the beginning of the story for them. This is not, this is a new and a new school and a new process. But again, I think it's extraordinarily interesting and innovative. And I was lucky enough to be at the school just in this last month, and to see and hear the work that they're doing and how they're working with Volantis to really engage students and teachers, and hopefully eventually parents and the community, being able to provide evidence of a student's development within the competencies that they want to develop. So it's not just teacher gives them a grade on a piece of work, or the student self-assesses, I think I should have done harder, tried more at this. It's a case of they can give and provide feedback at any stage that goes into a file that would then become a part of their, I guess, the record of their journey, so that they can really develop it. Now, the beauty of also what they've done and the documents that they have very happily shared, that will be available for you in the resources later. As this is focused around civics, and so it's developing democracy and the feelings and beliefs and their responsibilities that are required for the democratic community to work together. And so they've combined that really core belief in the importance of each individual being respected and having a voice, with an ability to try and develop the specific competencies that enable that to happen. And then not just doing or planning this, but trying to find a way where this can be evaluated. So the use of AI,
Sorry, go ahead.
really, I think, extraordinarily exciting. I mean, it's just, oh my gosh, I want to see it in 5 years when it's polished, right? But the beginning, it's starting, but I think it's an extraordinarily innovation. Looking
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, and using that AI piece to sort of, help them to give that feedback that they want to give to their learners. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, the vision of the graduate, or the idea of those graduate competencies, is something that CPS has been working on pretty steadily over the past 5 years. And as you were talking, it made me think of Nipmuc High School, which is in Upton, Massachusetts, where they have a portrait of the learner. And they have students that actually create portrait of the learner profiles that talk about the quality that they feel most that they identify with. And then they talk about sort of experiences that they've had, artifacts of their work that show their competency within that specific quality. And they're also using the Mastery Transcript Consortium, the Mastery Transcript, to tell their stories about how each learner has developed those competencies over time. Because as you said, this focus not just on content, but also on skills, and what are the skills that learners will need to be successful in their future, whatever they do after high school, after they graduate. So yeah, thank you for lifting that up. I'm just going to put also the Nipmuc information in the chat as well, and Darlene will have the information about the program that she mentioned too. Edie, do you have another one on learning design, another example?
Sure. So my example comes from the Waring School, which is in Beverly, Massachusetts. And this community, which is a relatively small school, they took the concept of maker spaces and STEM education, and they really supercharged it by fusing together technology and creativity and competition. And they do this through participating in robotics challenges. And they have two signature teams. One is called the Wolf Pack, and the other is called the Brick Wolves. And they are competing at the World Championship level in these many different technologically based robotics competitions that exist now. And when I think about school spirit around competition, the excitement that this community had for this program when I visited, it was contagious. So the Wolfpack, they compete in something called the First Tech Challenge, and it's a robotics problem-solving competition. And so it could be something like building a robot that can move a jug of liquid from one space to another without spilling the material. But it takes such intense teamwork from the coding, from the building, and then from the executing of this maze that the students haven't seen until they've walked into this physical space. The other example, the Brick Wolves, this is a Lego-based robotics competition, which is just growing in popularity, especially with middle schools these days. And similarly, it's this idea of using these bricks that, invoke the spirit of creativity to build robots that do various tasks. I know very little about robotics and coding, and I think what really captured me, in addition to the school spirit, was that at Waring, They have students from age 12 through 18 working together on these projects. And that seemed really special. It was also incredibly aligned with their mission. And I want to get this right. So the Waring School's mission is to build a community of lifelong learners who are working together for the individual and common good. And so this idea of problem solving, yes, they're solving problems with Legos, and I don't mean to trivialize that in any way, but if you can do that, think about the problems they're going to solve in other places in their lives. And I have to say that the leader of this program, it's someone named Francis Schaefer. He is one of the most engaging educators I've ever met. And his ability to draw in so many different students who've different types of experience robotics and make them excited about this work. It's that contagious spirit that it makes you excited to see that in a school teacher.
Wonderful. Thank you. Carrie, do you want to share? It sounds like you have an elementary example. We'd love to hear that.
I do. I'd love to chat a little bit about St. Joseph's School in Needham, Massachusetts. This is a school that is preschool through grade 8, and they have an exceptional student support framework. And I find in New England and in spending some time in independent schools, that can be a struggle, is to find those resources to support students. And I really, in thinking about St. Joseph, I had the chance to be on their program visit. And one of the things that really stands out about their approach is how comprehensive and coordinated it is. It's designed to ensure that every student receives the individualized support to thrive, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, and physically. So let me tell you a little bit about it. At the heart of this system is the Learning Center, and this is staffed by 2 special education teachers and a grant-funded literacy specialist. And they're all trained in areas like data tracking, progress monitoring, and the Wilson reading instruction approach. And so one of the things that can be tricky about elementary schools is that sometimes we engage in a practice of collecting a lot of data, and we get a little stuck, and sometimes we struggle operationalizing that data and using that to inform some decision making. So I love this deliberate approach that this school takes. They provide targeted interventions, of course, in the reading and the writing and the math, but they also partner closely with classroom teachers to support students directly through both push in and pull out models. And the work is guided by 2 key teams, the child study team, and that's the meeting portion, and then the student services team. And the student services team consists of the assistant head of school, the school counselor, the learning center, the nurse, and the classroom teacher. So think about this dynamic and comprehensive team of people all working to support the learners, and how detailed and specific the approach is, not just focusing on the academic piece, but also the pieces I mentioned earlier, the social piece, the emotional piece, and the physical piece. And so the CST process is really clear, it's proactive, and it's really well documented. Teachers bring forward academic or behavioral concerns, and this is all supported by data, parent communication, and they collaborate with school leadership, the counseling program, the nursing staff to develop and monitor strategies. And so the student services team meets bi-weekly. They take a broad interdisciplinary view. They review student progress, coordinating services, and they ensure that health counseling and the academic support are all aligned. It's a really thoughtful, well-integrated model that not only meets students where they are, but positions them and their teachers for meaningful growth. It's a great example of how a Catholic school can provide deeply personalized, mission-driven support while really maintaining that collaborative culture of care. And so I think this example really supports that whole child approach and really pulls in the different people within the school community to support these students and to really help them just really be able to approach their learning and approach their friendships with great intentionality and support.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we're running out of time. We knew this would happen, but we've got one more example from Carl from Vermont this time.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to recently do a visit up in Winooski, Vermont, and visited Winooski High School. And there's so many different pieces I could talk about with this school, but just wanted to mention too, because I saw the thing about elementary in the chat. Really interesting was this is one of the first times I've visited a school where they are, I believe they're pre-K through 12 all in one building. And they do a good job of keeping, those grades distinct at times, but they do share a lot of spaces. And there's just this incredible community feel in that building because they're all located there. The piece I wanted to share, which around this topic is, they have a capstone, which a lot of schools have capstone projects or these culminating projects. Theirs are directly tied to what Alyson was just talking about, and I believe Darlene were talking about, where they've directly tied them to their, what we would refer to as their vision of graduate skills, but they talk about them as PXs. And these are these key skills, these dispositions that they want their learners to develop over time. The part about this that I thought was so unique and just the piece I wanted to share was that they have used these capstones to replace their midterms and finals. And so instead of going through the normal midterm and final process, what they've done is that they use that time that used to be set aside for these, large culminating summative assessments. They use these for students to present their capstones. And so what that means is that instead of thinking about this as just one big capstone that a student is working towards during their 4 years, students are presenting multiples of these throughout their times in high school. What was really powerful about that was that the students were really building and internalizing this sense of being really good public speakers. And so what happens is, not all of them are counting, not all of them, because they've really also too probably done one of the best jobs I've seen of students really understanding the idea of formative and summative. And so some of these capstones are truly formative, where they are just learning this process and they're talking about these skills, but they're also getting the practice of presenting. And so they really, really have internalized this. And the piece I just want to share that made it, I think, so exceptionally special was that they have a huge percentage of ML learners in their school, so multilingual learners. I believe the percentages across the K through 12, I want to say it's something like 35%, 38% of their school is multilingual learners. And so it was so powerful to see the confidence they were building in their students, that they could get up and that their voice was special, and that their voice deserved to be heard. And sharing it to the school and sharing it and doing these authentic audiences. It was just an incredibly powerful program. And my favorite part was we were talking to one of the students about these, and the student said to us, I wish I could get exactly right, but basically said, in Winooski, we're just known as good public speakers. And it was just so awesome to hear a kid say that and just see how much they've internalized that idea into who they are. So it was a very special example.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Carl. And I know from our work in the Vision of the Graduate, I've sort of come to this idea that if the Vision of the Graduate competencies or skills are not being able to come out of the mouths of students, if they're not able to say, I am a great problem solver because, or I am a great communicator because, or I am a global citizen because, then that Vision of the Graduate hasn't really reached the level where it's making an impact on kids. So it sounds like through these presentations, they're able to speak about the ways that they have developed those skills, and that's super powerful.
It's an awesome point, Alyson, because it's one of the best examples I've seen where students were just using that language naturally, and they were talking about those dispositions and just talking about it. A student was talking about how he had injured he had torn his ACL playing soccer. And so he did a capstone on resiliency and like the idea of coming back from that and those pieces. And like he was speaking about it just, naturally about this idea of resiliency and how he had learned so much about that. So
yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Well, it's been wonderful spending the hour with my colleagues today, and to be able to just hear about all of your experiences in different schools. I also want to mention that I think one of our main jobs also as directors is to sort of be a support for school leaders. And so we are here if you have questions, certainly about accreditation, but even if you just need someone to talk to about a difficult problem in your school or something that we can help you with, we're also here for that. And because we have this broad experience, we're able sometimes to connect you with another school that's doing something similar to what you're doing, or with other people that we feel like can help. And so I think part of our idea behind this webinar was just to get a chance to talk to you a little bit, to know you better, and for you to get to know us better, and for us to be a resource for you. So again, we really want you to reach out, to connect with us. Some of us are very good posters on LinkedIn, so you can find us on LinkedIn and follow us there. I am not that person, but others on this call are. And certainly connect with us. We'd also like to announce, and we put it in the chat, we have a date for our annual conference next year, which is going to be November 17th through 19th in Boston. So thank you so much. We are looking forward to our engagement with you next year. We wish you a great rest of the school year, and hopefully a very smooth and uneventful rest of the school year. We are also always thinking about you and really understanding that, you know, the things that are happening in our world and our country are impacting your jobs in schools every day. So just want to let you know that you're in our thoughts often, and we are always here if you need to reach out or want to contact us. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.